to the whole world. Well, Isaiah, who is the evangelist of the Old Testament, and when we read this chapter, you're familiar with this chapter, it is so specific. It is so clear, the gospel story. All we have to do is add the name of Herod and Pilate and Judas, and we know immediately what this is. So clear is this about. Well, let's look at this second section then, his rejection. And this is probably a statement of his rejection of his overall ministry. Who hath believed our report? The answer asked for is that nobody, or next to nobody, believed this report. Who believed the message of the prophet when he came? Next to nobody. Who believed the miracle? To whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Christ came doing mighty miracles, showing his dominance over death and disease and demons and like no one. Who believed that report? Hardly anyone. Then his whole ministry is described there in verse 2 and 3. He shall grow up before him as a tender plant. The Father is watching, his Son is growing up. It's like a tender plant, like a little shoot. This shoot is coming out of that once great tree of the stock of David that's been cut down, and there's nothing left of the kingdom of David. Except if you look, you see a little green shoot come up. Jesus, born in Bethlehem of Judea, to poor parents, unknown by the world, but the shoot is grown up. It's also described as a root out of dry ground. What a time for the Savior of the world to come. Israel was in apostasy and unbelief, and the Romans ruled, and it was not a favorable time. It was dry ground. Everything seemed to be against him. He had no form, nor comeliness. And when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He comes as a servant. Here is people's attitude towards a servant. No form. You're not interested. No comeliness. There's no beauty in the servant. No beauty. He's treated like a servant. He's despised and rejected of men. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And our response to him is we hid our faces from him. He's just a servant. Sometimes it's the way people find a drunkard on the street. He's just a drunkard. You got to turn away and go the other way. But he came as a servant. We esteem him not. Brother Al was right this afternoon. Check out your servant attitude. You get treated like a servant. How do you respond? That's the gauge. When people think you are worthless and you are of no value and they don't esteem you at all, how do you respond? Parents, sometimes your children and teens can do that to you. Sometimes husbands and wives can do that to each other. Sometimes church members can do that. How do we respond? He came as a servant. Well, then we enter the middle section where he's going to do the work. That was the purpose. He's going to come as a servant. He's going to be ignored. He's going to be rejected. But he's still going to carry out the will of his Father, the mission of his Father. He's a servant. He's going to carry it out continually in the Gospels, we see this reoccurring. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. I am come and I do only the will of my Father. He's the servant. He's the perfect one. Now he comes. Here is the chief work he's come to do. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Notice the words of suffering. Here is physical suffering. Here is social suffering. Here is spiritual suffering. Stricken, smitten, afflicted, wounded, bruised, chastened, stripes. The word cross doesn't appear there, but it is described for us. We must realize that physical pain and bruising and cuts and punctures and stuff is painful, and as much as we dread that, that often doesn't hurt as much as things people say to us. Being sinless and called a sinner. Doing this to rescue mankind and being treated in such a contemptuous way. But even beyond that, we know about the physical pain, and we know how much it hurts us inside when people say things and do things, especially those that we love. But there's also buried the sin in the world. We don't know anything about that. Sin is just so common to us. Notice the pronouns, our. Verse 5, our. It was for us. All these things took place. And then verse 6, what a wonderful verse, lays it out for us, ties together sheep theology for us. All we like sheep have gone astray. We are sinners by nature. We have turned everyone to his own way. We are sinners by choice. There's no hope for us except the Lord laid upon him the iniquity of us all. The servant, the lamb, the sheep is a person, and he's going to bear the iniquity of us all. The all sinners, starting the verse. The all, the possibility of being redeemed, ending the verse. We go into the fourth section. That's his rejection again. But this seems to lay before us, verse 7, his trial. Verse 8, his death. Verse 9, his burial. Look at his trial. The words that describe his trial: he was oppressed. He was afflicted. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. That describes the trial of Christ. He was grabbed in the night. He was arraigned in courts through the middle of the night that were totally illegal and unfair. The outcome was already determined. He's like a lamb going to the slaughter. It's already determined what's going to happen. And the characteristic of this, mentioned twice in verse 7, is that he didn't open his mouth. Ever stop to think what happened if the Lord did open his mouth?